Well, this segment's not long enough for Eric Holder's response, but let me tee it up again. He's being asked by the congressman, why do you need all this money, all these slots over there in the Civil Rights Division? You know, we've got some questions about the way that this division is being managed, whether in fact it is colorblind, whether in fact it is pursuing all violations. And you'll see Holder takes great offense to this. By the way, breaking news before we go to the break and come back with Holder. Senator Daniel Akaka of Hawaii is going to retire. I thought Akaka already did. I guess he's around. Maybe they ought to have a candidate run in his place. How about Wiener instead of Akaka? All right, we'll be right back. I'm not trying to play games as a host. It's just that our clock works in such a way as I couldn't get in Eric Holder's response. So remember now, Congressman John Culbertson lays out the case, all this funding and new positions for the Civil Rights Division. He mentions the new Black Panthers case, and there was a gentleman who worked for Robert Kennedy's Justice Department, and he said this was one of the worst cases he'd ever seen. And by the way, a friend of mine reminded me, what he meant by one of the worst cases he'd ever seen was for this Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division to drop a slam-dunk case like the new Black Panther case. Not that it was historically, necessarily, the worst case he'd ever seen. But leave it up to Eric Holder to twist it and play games. But listen carefully to your Attorney General. Go ahead.
First, the people in the Black Panther case did not admit, because they did not appear, and a default judgment was entered against them.
Right, that's the point.
Not contest liability.
But you said admit, that's an affirmative action.
But they did not contest it.
I think that the quote that you read from that gentleman, that this was the greatest affront in history
that he'd ever seen.
I mean, that
personal opinion.
But I mean, think about that. When you compare what people endured in the South in the 60s to try to get the right to vote for African Americans, and to compare what people were subjected to there to what happened in Philadelphia, which is inappropriate, it's certainly that, but to call that, to put it, describe it in those terms, I think does a great disservice to people who put their lives on the line, who risked all for my people. My wife's sister integrated the University of Alabama. When George Wallace stood in the door and said that she, as a state resident, could not attend the University of Alabama, Vivian Malone, who I'm proud to say was my sister-in-law, to compare that kind of courage, that kind of action, and to say that the Black Panther incident, wrong though it might be, somehow is greater in magnitude or is of greater concern to us historically, I think just flies in the face of history and in the facts. And I just want to assure again the American people that the allegations that somehow, some way, this Justice Department does things on the basis of race is simply false. It is simply false. Anybody who makes that contention is not telling the truth, is not familiar with the facts, or has a political agenda.
Well, sir, you're wrong. You're wrong. Your intervention in Arizona was all about race and all about pandering, and you damn well know it. Your department hasn't given a single credible explanation for dropping the new Black Panther case where there had been a default judgment. That is, they didn't defend. So what's the rationale? What's the rationale? Forget about all the histrionics here. What is the rationale? And he's right. What took place in the 1960s was disgusting. It truly was. But he has the power now as Attorney General of the United States to do what's right. Is he doing what's right? Now, why is he so massively expanding the Civil Rights Division, both in terms of staff and budget increases, if there's no historical comparison to what took place before? What's going on today in America that requires this? I mean, he can't have it both ways. A massive increase in his budget, a huge increase in staffing. What's it for? Is it the 1960s? You just said it's not. So what is it? I'm just curious. And we don't have an answer. And we'll never get an answer from this Attorney General who should have resigned long ago. And yes, you make a lot of decisions based on politics. I didn't know that the United States Attorney in New York was a former counsel to Chuck Schumer on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I believe. How the hell did that happen? Was he chosen because he was the best crime buster known to the Justice Department, or was he chosen because he was a Schumer guy? I'm sure that wasn't a political decision either. I'm not saying appointing U.S. attorneys doesn't have some aspect of politics in it, but let's not play games. I seem to recall that Attorney General Ashcroft's assistance and hiring practices and the White House's involvement, if there was any, in the appointment of U.S. attorneys was a subject. Oh, that was Gonzales, Attorney General Gonzales, I believe, excuse me. Remember all the brouhaha about that, and they had 7 or 8 or 9 of them who said they were fired because of politics? Well, I want to know how the U.S. attorney in New York got his job. Maybe he's a perfectly great guy. I have no reason to doubt that. That's not my point. There's a lot of perfectly great guys and gals who get their jobs from political influence. Great. But I thought that in and of itself was a problem. Apparently not for this administration. But he never answers the question, does he? We don't need history lessons from Eric Holder. John Lewis can give a better history lesson on what happened in the South. His politics aside, he was a very, very brave man. So if we want a history lesson, we can get it from him and many, many others who were actually there. Not Eric Holder. What we want to know from Eric Holder, who's the United States Attorney General, is about how he's managing the Justice Department. It is a huge and crucially important responsibility. And he's surrounded by radicals of his choosing and Obama's choosing. And there does appear to be a pattern here, does there not? And why is he trying to massively increase the budget and staff at the Civil Rights Division? Are there widespread civil rights violations going on in this country? I'm just curious, because I just heard the man say you can't compare this to the 1960s. Okay, then what do we compare it to? And he's right about that, by the way. I've been arguing that all along. We're nothing like we were 50 years ago. And yet, some on the left want to keep bringing it up. Eric Holder just brought it up to tell us we're nothing like we were 50 years ago, but I need a massive new increase in the Civil Rights Division. Why? So they can punish more states to try and protect themselves? That's the new civil rights issue? Just curious. Let me take a call. Mitchell, New Rochelle, New York, the great WABC, a Democrat. Go ahead.
Mark Levin, how are you?
All right, sir.
If you have a moment, I wanted to just clarify an issue of the debt, which seems to be underscoring everything that's going on today. If Bush's debt was $52,000 a person and Obama's debt is $72,000 and rising, my question to you, my question to anybody who listens to your show, is how are you going to pay the Bush debt at Was your intention ever to pay the Bush debt?
Let me help you out, pal. I don't have an archives available right now, but we used to trash the spending of the Bush administration left and right. That's the difference between conservatives and liberal Democrats. Have you ever spoken up against Obama's spending? Have you ever?
Well, I'm asking simply, it isn't a question of the spending.
I will deal with that in a second. I asked you a question. Have you ever spoken out or spoken up against the massive deficit spending that's going on right now?
I was willing to support and will continue to support.
All right, sir, you're not going to answer my question. I'm trying to have a conversation. I'm going to answer yours in a moment. Can you please tell me if you've ever spoken out against the Obama massive spending? Yes or no?
The answer is yes, to the extent that universal health care, which is an underpinning of this society that I value, and after 50 years
there is no underpinning of this society, universal health care. What are you talking about?
Excuse me, again, what did you say?
There's no universal health care underpinning in this society. What are you talking about?
Your equation of Obamacare, for all the fits and starts and the trouble you've given it.
All right, sir, he has gotten us into what will soon be $5 trillion in 3 years, a modern record. You should be very proud of this. In 3 years, and by the time he's done, he's going to make Bush look like Calvin Coolidge, and we haven't even kicked in yet with the massive spending on Obamacare. Does any of that bother you?
Universal health care, the proper...
Okay, so I'll go on. My answer to your question is, it's right at the back of my book, A Conservative Manifesto. I would cut government 20% across the board. I would put a requirement via constitutional amendment in place, you asked, limiting the percentage of the gross domestic product that the government could spend. to 17 or 18%. I would require supermajorities to increase taxes, so no more private property earned by hard-working people, middle class, lower class, whatever class, as you Marxists like to say, is stolen from them to be given to complete strangers who benefit the Democrat Party. That's what I would do. As for health care, I would break up the monopoly, the government monopoly on health care. I would open up the Food and Drug Administration so we could get more life-saving and quality-improving drugs to the public at a faster rate. I would not allow a committee of a handful of phony experts to decide who lives and who dies by what procedures and drugs are approved. I would open up our society to massive competition and participation, where there are small insurance companies, medium insurance companies, large insurance companies operating across state lines, offering people policies with and without certain requirements. That's what I would do. Got it?
And the basis...
Get out of here, you drone. You didn't hear a word I said, big dummy. Tell you, this is, some of you get upset with me. This is why I don't waste my time with the drones. The other hosts, they go on and on and on and on trying to prove how brilliant they are. I don't care. It's a waste of time. No matter what I tell that guy, he's going to go to that voting place with his cream of wheat spilling down his chin in the morning. He's going to be the first one in line. Who's going to give me more? Where's the Democrat? Who's going to give me? He doesn't give a crap about the next generation or the one after that. He just wants to save $5 on his next prescription. I've seen it a million times. All right, I just looked it up. The Bush yearly deficits. You ready? 2001, $128 billion surplus. 2002, $158 billion deficit. 2003, $378 billion deficit. 2004, $413 billion deficit. 2005, $318 billion deficit. 2006, $248 billion deficit. 2007, $162 billion deficit. 2008, $410 billion. Nothing to write home about, but it's not $1.65 trillion. Or last year, $1.4 trillion. I mean, my God, ladies and gentlemen. These deficits, we would kill to have these deficits today, would we not? And yet the dead enders, the Obama dead enders, you heard that guy. He asked me a question. I'm giving him a fulsome response. He's talking over me like some homeless guy on the street. Well, there, you have the figures now. Not even close. We'll be right back.